Thanks for tuning in today. I'd like to start off with a little piece of career advice that used to get my ears boxed when I gave it to my students at Harvard, and that is your job search is more important than your classes. That's right, your job search is more important than your classes. Now you can imagine the dean wasn't very happy with me, so we came to a compromise, and the compromise was your classes are just as important as your job search. You all know that, otherwise you wouldn't be tuning in the middle of a beautiful day. So thanks for coming out. There's a couple things that are important when doing case interviews. So practice, nothing beats live practice. Students at other top universities, other top MBA programs will do 30 live cases before they stick their big toe into an interview. 30 live cases. They'll probably read 30 cases as well, because it builds up an archive in the back of their mind, and they can draw from one case and apply it to another case. And another thing you want to do is start a case journal. With every case you do, write down what was the problem, what did the solution turn out to be, but more importantly, what didn't I think of? And the things that you don't think about naturally will become second nature to you as you put them in this journal and you flip back and forth constantly through this. There are also some things on a reading list that I want you to get in a habit of looking at. Certainly the Wall Street Journal, the McKinsey Quarterly is wonderful. It's cutting edge stuff written by practitioners, and also Bloomberg, the Business Week. You should be reading those on a regular basis. Also attending information meetings. And you know, one of the secrets about an information meeting is to show up early. If it starts at 6, if I was a student, I'd get there at 20 of 6, because the recruiters are there, they're setting up their PowerPoint, they're making sure the cheese table looks nice, and then they're just talking amongst themselves. If you show up, they're going to be all over you because you're the reason why they're there. So show up early. You can have a 5 to 7 minute conversation with one of the recruiters. If you get there early, they're more likely to have their business cards to give out. If you show up at 6 o'clock with everyone else, you're going to have to wait till the end of the presentation and hope to get 45 seconds to a minute with someone who's already talked to 7 other people. So if you want to be memorable, if you want to make that contact because you want somebody on the inside rooting for you, show up early to the information meetings. Here are the 5 key things that candidates do in order to receive offers. The first one is they show that they're committed to consulting. Okay, consulting firms like low-risk hires, and you're a low-risk hire if you've done it before, you like it and you want to go back, or you know exactly what you're getting into. The type of work, the travel, working as part of a team, working on projects. Their biggest fear is that they're going to spend a lot of time, effort, and money recruiting, hiring, and training you, and then you're going to bail after 6 months because, you know what, this isn't what I thought it was. So you need to prove to them that you're committed and you know exactly what you're doing. They also like success-oriented people. Well, you wouldn't be here at the schools that you're at if you weren't. They like people who have good quant skills. There's a lot of math in these questions, and you can't use a calculator. When was the last time you did long division by hand? When was the last time you multiplied 2 numbers together and your answer had 8 or 9 zeros at the end of it? Now, the main reason why they make you do math without a calculator isn't to see whether you can multiply and divide. It's to see whether you think before you speak. So if you told me the answer is supposed to be 180 million and it's really supposed to be 1.8 billion, and 180 million doesn't make any sense at all, it's going to raise some eyebrows because it's showing them that you're not thinking before you speak. They like people who are able to articulate their thoughts under pressure. A case interview is really a role play. Okay, I'm the client, you're the consultant, here's my problem, what do I do? You have a very short period of time to listen to my problem, lay out a structure, come up with a solution, and then articulate that solution while someone is sitting 2 feet away from you, watching everything you do and everything you write down. It's a very intimidating process, which is why I want you to do 30 live cases. One other thing about the math, a good rule of thumb is whenever you do a calculation, take an extra second and ask yourself, does this number make sense? If it makes sense, then say it. If it doesn't make sense, go back and recalculate it. Because you know they're going to make you recalculate it anyway. And you can't unring the bell. So take an extra second and just ask yourself if this number makes sense. They also like people who are a good fit with the industry. They love people who love solving problems. You know when you work hard and you study hard for an exam and you go in and you can't wait for the professor to hand it out so you can rip right through it? They want that same look. They want that same enthusiasm. A number of my students, even after they got the job, would come into my office and say, give me a case. They love doing cases. For them, it was no different than doing a crossword puzzle. They loved the intellectual challenge, and they learned something new every time they did one. And if they were that excited about doing a case, even after they got the job, imagine what they were like in the interview, which is probably the reason why they got the job in the first place. Also, there's a thing called the Pittsburgh Airport test, which is basically how would I feel if I was snowed in for 9 hours at Pittsburgh Airport with you? Would we have a lot to talk about? Are you interesting, well-read, good sense of humor, a Boston Red Sox fan? Or am I going to have to pretend I'm in a coma so I don't have to talk to you? After working with you and traveling with you and eating all my meals with you for 40, 50, 60 hours a week, at the end of the week, am I going to want to take you out for a beer? Or am I going to want to take you out and shoot you? So that's the airport test. Now there are different types of cases, different types of case questions. One side is the market sizing question. It could be a standalone question or it could be encased in a larger question. So an example might be how many disposable diapers were sold in the United States last year? Now, even if you had read that in the Wall Street Journal 2 minutes before you walked into the interview, they could care less. They want to see how you would come up with a solution or an answer based solely on logic and assumptions. So some of these questions are standalone, like how many disposable diapers were sold in the United States, and some are encased in a larger problem. So that same question might be, DuPont has developed a new material, it's biodegradable, super absorbent, strong, perfect for disposable diapers. How big is the disposable diaper market? Should DuPont enter this market? And if so, how? That answer is going to take you a good half an hour to do it justice. Now, whenever I get a market sizing question, I like to break it down into either general population, household, or who makes this stuff up. Now, general population question would be the diaper question. Also remember that they're more interested in your thought process than in whether or not your numbers are spot on. But I'm going to give you a couple numbers to memorize so you're comfortable with them and you can use them over and over again. The first one is the population of the United States. Now, we did a census a couple years ago, and our population is 310 million. But 310 is not an easy number to work with, so I'm going to boost it up to 320. I'm also going to assume that the life expectancy of an American is 80 years and that there's an even distribution among the ages. So there's the exact same number of 2-year-olds as there are 72-year-olds. We know that that's not true, but for a case like this, it's a fair assumption. So now you got a nice clean 4 million people per age group. The final number that you should memorize, 100 million US households. But even if you go in and you use numbers that you didn't memorize or use numbers that are off, that's fine. Again, they're more interested in your thought process and then whether or not your assumptions are spot on. So say I went in and I said the population of the United States is 250 million. Life expectancy is 75. So that means there's about 3.3 million people per age group. Okay, children wear diapers on average from age 0 to 3, 9.9, 10 million kids. I'm going to assume that 80% of them wear disposable diapers. It's probably closer to 95%, but 80 is a much easier number to work with, and I want my numbers to be easy because I'm doing most of this in my head or I'm writing it down. So now we have 8 million kids hopefully changing their diapers 5 times a day. So that's 40 million diapers a day times 365 or 370. Now, you may not agree with all my assumptions, but as long as you can follow my logic, I'm fine. Now, a household question might be, how many Netflix DVDs get lost in the mail every year? Okay, I was at Notre Dame a couple years ago doing a one-on-one mock with an international student, and I asked him how many Netflix DVDs get lost in the mail every year. And he started to give me his answer, and I said, wait a minute, do you know what Netflix is? And he said, no, I have no idea. And I said, how can you talk about something you know nothing about? And he said, I do it all the time in class. Well, you can get away with it in class, but you can't get away with it in a case interview. So if they ever give you industry jargon, slang, string of initials, anything you don't understand, ask. You don't get any points taken off for clarifying questions. In fact, those are the only questions you can ask during the market sizing. All right, so we're going to start with the general population of the United States, which is 320 million. We're going to assume 3.2 people per household, 100 million households. Then I need to figure out how many of those households have access to the internet and a DVD player. My gut's telling me 75%. USA last year had it pegged at about 68%, but I'm going to lowball it. I'm going to say 50%. And the reason is because I want my numbers to be as easy as possible. And again, the recruiters aren't going to care. And you can bet when they were on your side of the table, they probably did the same thing. So now we have 50 million households with access to the internet and a DVD player. Now the key number here is how many of those households actually have a Netflix account. Now Netflix has been in the news a lot lately, and you might know that they have 25 million accounts. But knowing that is going to hurt you more than help you, because now it's changing the way that you think. Instead of thinking through discovery, you're trying to back into that number. And there's a danger in that. The other problem is if you just pull a number out of the air and say 10%, they're going to be all over you. What went through your mind when you came up with that number? What were you thinking about? So what you want to do is say something like, all right, Netflix has been around almost 10 years. They've been first to market. They got a good marketing program, great customer service. You get your DVD in about a day. However, there's a lot of competition now. First off, a big chunk of the Netflix customers stream only. You can download movies onto your iPad or your computer. You can rent them at Redbox. You can buy them at Walmart. There's pay-per-view, video on demand, kind of bundling all that together. Taking all that information, bundling it together, I'm going to say that they have 10% of those households. So now we have 5 million households. I'm going to assume they rent one movie a week. That's 4 a month, so that's 20 million a month times 12 months. 240 million DVDs get mailed out by Netflix every year. Now, it has 2 chances to get lost because it goes from Netflix to your house and back again. And the U.S. Postal Service is pretty good on most days, but I'm going to assume that they lose maybe 1%. So that's 2.4 million DVDs that get lost in the mail every year. Again, you may agree with me, you may disagree with some of my assumptions, but it doesn't matter. As long as you can follow my logic, I'm fine. Now, who makes this stuff up kind of question is something like, how many jelly donuts fit inside the Leaning Tower of Pisa? Or how many slices of pizza does it take to reach the moon? Or how much does a 747 weigh? Now, it's a little scary to think after how many years of school your job search comes down to a question like that. But these are questions that you're going to face. Now, how much does a 747 weigh? Do you know how wide the wingspan is? You know how much fuel it holds, how many tires it has, how many seats are on board, how many miles of cable snake through that thing? Most people don't, and they don't expect you to. What they're looking is to see how you break the plane apart, assign dimensions and weight, and then add it all up. But in this case, there's an X factor. And the X factor is the plane is on the tarmac, sealed up and ready to go. And when a plane is sealed up, there's captured air inside. And captured air has weight. Now, it would take a physics formula this long to figure out the captured air inside a 747. They don't know. They just want to make sure that you're thinking about this. Remember, so much of this is what goes through your mind and in what order when you hear a problem. Now, the cases that you're most likely to get are business cases. Most of them are going to be one-on-one verbal cases. Here's my problem, what do I do? Or here's my problem, I want you to figure out these 4 things: market size, break even, profits, and maybe price. Sometimes you'll get an individual case like that, but sometimes you'll get a team case. Sometimes in the first round, you'll walk in and you'll be sitting around a table with 3 people, 3 other people you don't even know. What the recruiters are looking for there is how well you play with others. Because on one hand, these other guys, they're your competition, right? They're going after the exact same job that you're going after. But for this one moment in time, they're your teammates. And you need to treat them with respect, and you need to be inclusive. So you can't elbow them on the side. You can't kick them under the table. You want to get your point across, but you don't want to get it across at someone else's expense. So work through it, get your point across, but remember what they're looking at is how well you interact with your peers. Treat them as you would your classmates when you're working in a problem set. Another type of team interview is you walk in, they hand you 2 or 3 pages of written text. And you walk into another room and there are 3 other people there, all with the same papers. There's a computer in the room, but the only thing on the computer is a PowerPoint program. You guys take an hour, read the case, prepare a presentation, and then I'm bringing 3 other consultants in and you're going to present the case to us. Meanwhile, the recruiter sits in the corner of the room and watches the dynamics. Who becomes the leader and how do they become the leader? Is it forced on people or does it happen naturally? Who does the quant stuff? Who does the PowerPoint stuff? Are there discussions, arguments, fistfights? What goes on in there? So then you make the presentation, they bring in 4 consultants. The only thing is that everyone talks for 5 minutes during the presentation. Now they may bring 1 of you back, they may bring all 4 of you back, but you all get judged individually. Also, there are regular written cases that you can get. You walk in, they hand you 2 or 3 pages of written text, say, take a half an hour, read this, and be prepared to present it. So you read it through, and oh, by the way, I want 3 PowerPoint slides to go along with what you're going to tell me, and I want one of them to be a chart. Well, in this case, you have no calculator, you have no computer, which means no PowerPoint, no chart wizard. All you have are 3 blank sheets of paper. So you need to make your presentation there. Also, you may get a written case where you're sitting in a conference room. This is usually in the latter rounds. They come in and they drop a document on your desk that's anywhere between 80 and 120 pages long. Take an hour or take a half an hour, read this and be prepared to discuss it. Now, if that ever happens to you, what you want to do, besides climb out the window, is to read the executive summary up front and then spend the rest of the time with the exhibits in the back. You're going to learn much more by going through the exhibits than you ever would by starting on page 1 and reading as far as you can in a half an hour. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, a chart's got to be worth what, 350, 400? Stick with the charts. Now, also on the business cases, there are the 4 most popular kinds of cases. The first one is profit and loss. Then also entering a new market. And entering a new market could be market size, it could be M&A, it could be a new business, it could be a new product. Then there's also pricing and growth are both very popular. Pricing a lot of times is part of a larger case. And then there's a case called strategy by numbers, where they give you some information, you talk about it, and then they dump a lot of numbers on to you, and you calculate the numbers and try to figure it out. Now, the one warning there is never make a decision based solely on the numbers alone. Okay, you want to look at all the information that they give you before you make a recommendation. Now, when you hit the, sometimes you'll also meet with the partners, and the partner cases are a little different. Sometimes they'll just have an idea and they'll throw it out to see if you can talk to power, if you can have a conversation with power. Should Apple buy Netflix before Facebook does? Who knows if either of those companies are interested in Netflix at all? But they just want to see how you would structure an argument and how you would talk to power. And sometimes you'll get a case with a partner, and she'll say, I made a presentation last night to a client. This was the problem. This was the solution. I presented it in 7 slides. What's on my slides and in what order? And you'll say, well, ooh, that's entering a new market case. I'm sure you talked about this. Yes, I did, but that was slide number 3. Why'd you put it first? And so basically she'll badger you until you get all 7 slides and in the right order. So those are the types of cases that you're most likely to see. The most popular case is a profit and loss case. And on your screen you see the framework that you probably want to use for a profit and loss. Okay? It's not, I don't want to say it's carved in stone, but it's carved in wood, maybe a nice hardwood like mahogany or something. So inside the parentheses, you see that profits equal revenue minus cost. That's telling me what's going on inside the company. But I want to look at external factors first because I want to know, is this our problem or is this an industry-wide problem? So you'll see the E, and the E stands for the economy. Now you guys can probably give me 20 things going on inside the economy, and that's great, but it's not really helpful in these cases. What you want to do is you want to come up with 2 or 3 things that are going on in the economy right now that are important to the client company. And they could be pretty broad things. So you might say the U.S. is in the tail end of a recession, unemployment's over 8%, gas prices are over $4 a gallon, and people have less disposable income. On the good news, the dollar's still weak against most of the major foreign currencies, and interest rates are at a near 30-year low. The reason why you want to talk about the economy is it gives you control of the interview right away. You're defining the economic environment in which this case is taking place. And knowing that, there's going to be fewer punches, fewer surprises. The other side of the parentheses is an M, which stands for the market or the industry. Now, no one expects you to know what's going on in a particular industry. They have a lot of information that they want to give you, but they're not going to give it to you unless you ask for it. It may take a series of questions to drag out of them, or it just may take one question and they'll do a data dump. So you ask them questions about the industry. Now, when they say to you the industry grew by 8% last year, don't be happy with it because it's not enough information. Because if the industry grew by 12% last year and 8% this year, that 8% looks very different to me than if it was at 2% last year and 8% this year. You always, always, always want to ask for trends. You can bet that's one of the first things out of a consultant's mouth because they like to put things in context. Okay? So always ask for trends, and I'm always surprised as I go around the country and do mock interviews with MBAs that very few of them ever ask me for trends. So get in a habit of doing that. So now we're going to go inside the parentheses and we're going to look at the revenue side first. Even if you think that the problem has to do with cost, you still need to understand the revenue streams before you can intelligently cut any costs. So a good question to ask is, what are the major revenue streams and how have they changed over time? And then eventually, what are the major costs, both fixed and variable, and how have they changed over time? So that takes you inside the company, and as you work through it, you'll come up with some answers. And then you get to the point in a profit and loss case where they say, okay, well, how are you going to increase profits? Now, the key thing here is when you get to that point, you need to start generating strategies. The first thing you do on your paper, you write down revenue-based strategies and cost-based strategies. And then you say, I just want to take a moment and jot down my thoughts and write them down however they pop in your head. So revenue-based strategies, cost-based strategies, by laying it out, you're showing them that you're thinking 2 steps ahead, you're well organized. It's easier to come up with ideas when you're looking at a heading versus a blank sheet of paper, and it keeps you from commingling your ideas, because I want all the revenue-based ones and then all the cost-based ones. The other thing is that, remember, these guys have given this case 25 times before. They know every possible answer that you can come up with, and they may not want to sit and listen to the whole answer. So as soon as you start answering and they know where you're headed, in their mind they're going to check it off and give you credit for the answer, and then they're going to cut you off and say, okay, what else do you have? What else do you have? And you know that when you get cut off in mid-thought under a high-pressure situation, it's difficult to drop that thought and come up with something new. When I do it to my students in a mock interview, 80% of them keep talking as if I didn't say a word. They have this need to kind of get the rest of their answer out. And I have to cut them off 2, sometimes 3 times. And then they look at me, panic, and then their brains shut down and they can't think of another damn thing. So by writing it down, if you get cut off, you just go to the next bullet point. Now, the other type of question is the entering a new market. And this could be mergers and acquisitions, it could be new product, new business. And the structure you want to use here is you want to look at the acquiring company if it's an M&A. Who are they? Why did they want to buy this? And what else do they own, or what other products do they have? What are the, what was the reason for buying it? And also, are there any synergies that you're going to be able to take advantage of? You also want to analyze the client company, who they are. You want to analyze the industry, so you have a good understanding of the industry, not only the trends, but who are the major players, what market share do they have, how do their products or services differ from what we're going to offer, and are there any barriers to entry or barriers to exit? And then whenever you get an enter a new market question, it's not only do we enter this market, but how do we enter the market? And basically there are 3 ways. You can start from scratch and grow organically, you can buy your way in, or you can do a joint venture. And you would look at the advantages and disadvantages of each one of those. So those are the 2 most popular cases. I can't guarantee that you're going to get one of those, but I'd be surprised if you didn't. Now, the first 5 steps, okay, they give you the case. The first thing you do is you summarize the case. And the reason you do that is some of these questions are very short. How do we increase sales at the campus bookstore? But some are long and involved and have lots of numbers. And this information's coming at you like a fire hose, and you're writing it down as fast as you can. But you may not capture all the data, and you don't want to spend the next half hour answering a case with only partial information. So you don't want to ask them to repeat it because they don't like to repeat anything. So by summarizing it, you get to hear it again, and you lay it all out for the interviewer. And they may say to you, you know what, I said 60%, I didn't say 40%, and you forgot this. So you and the interviewer are basically on the same page from the get-go. The other reason why you want to summarize it is it fills the gap of silence between the end of their question and the beginning of your answer. Okay? Because if they give you a question and they sit there, or you sit there and you look up at the ceiling, it seems like a lifetime, and the awkward clock starts ticking. Okay? You're dead in the water, you got no momentum. But if you summarize it, you got a little momentum going, and then you verify the objective. The objective often drives the whole case. And there's usually a secondary objective that they don't tell you about that's going to pop up halfway through the case and bite you. So you'll want to get into a habit of saying, besides, let's say, increasing sales, are there any other objectives I should be concerned with? If there are, they'll tell you. If there's not, you don't have to worry about it. Okay? But you don't want to get sandbagged in the middle of a case when they bring up another objective. The third step is asking questions. This is your opportunity to gather data about the company, the market, the product, whatever the case is about. You can ask 3 to 5 questions initially to gather data. But don't pepper them with a lot of questions to buy time. They can pick up on that very quickly and they don't like it. And also, don't phrase questions to make them feel as if you're trying to get them to answer the case for you. Again, they hate that, and they'll throw it right back in your face and say, well, what do you think? And then you either need to rephrase the question or start making assumptions. The fourth step, which is by far the hardest, is laying out your structure. Okay? Basically, a structure is, given the limited information that we have so far, at this moment in time, how would you go about answering this case? Now, a couple things about structure. One, you're not married to it. Some structures you're going to use and they'll work it all the way through the case. Other structures, you lay it out and then they're going to become obsolete within 2 minutes because new information, twists and turns in the case are going to be added. So you're not married to it, but structure is extremely important, especially when you get a case like, here's my problem, what do I do? That's an interviewee-driven case. You're driving the case, and you need to take control of it, and the best way to do that is to lay out a structure. The other type of case is, here's my problem, what do? I want you to figure out these 4 things. That's an interviewer-driven case. The interviewer is driving that case, telling you what he or she wants you to answer. After the structure, you should state a hypothesis. Okay? And basically a hypothesis is just a statement that you can prove or disprove. It helps narrow down the scope of the question. And you should be able to do it within the first 3 to 5 minutes of the interview. In real life, consultants can take anywhere from 1 to 3 days to come up with a hypothesis. Don't worry if you disprove it, that's fine as well, but they like you to state one, particularly on cases like, here's my problem, what do I do? Now that being said, steps 3 through 5 can be flipped around, because if you know that it's a profit and loss case, you already know what the structure is, so you're going to lay out your structure, maybe even state your hypothesis, and then ask some questions. You'll get a feel for this as you practice. And again, remember, nothing beats live practice, and you're going to want to do 30 live cases. Now, here's an example for a second. A private equity firm bought a brand name shoe company for $2 billion. They paid $43 a share. The stock was trading at $30 a share at the time of the announcement. The shoe company generates $1.5 billion in sales. They have 230 stores worldwide, 200 of which are in the United States. Last year, they experienced a drop in profits. Their profits fell by 30%. The chairman of the private equity firm calls you into her office and says, raise profits by 50%. So when you summarize a case, there's a couple things you want to do. One, you want to hit on all the numbers, because you don't know whether or not the information they just gave you is relevant or not. Some of it's going to be relevant. You're going to jump on it and run right away. Some of it's going to be pure smoke. It's there to mess with you. But some of it, you're not sure whether it's relevant or not. So you want to make sure you get all the numbers right. Also, if there's any numbers that are related, you want to quantify them as a percentage. Okay, so in this case, they paid $43 a share. You don't want to say they paid $43 a share. You don't want to say they paid a $13 premium. What you want to say is they paid a little more than a 40% premium. So always quantify numbers that are related as a percentage, whether it's a shift in stock price or whether it's year-to-year data to compare. So if I summarize this case, I would say, okay, there was a private equity firm. They bought a brand name shoe company for $2 billion. They paid a little over 40% premium. The shoe company generates $1.5 billion in sales. They have 230 stores, 85% of which are in the United States. They experienced a 30% decline in profits. Besides increasing profits by 50%, is there any other objective I should be concerned with? If there is, they'll tell you. If there's not, don't worry about it. Now, as a side note, I've given this case over 50 times, and not one MBA has ever asked me about the private equity firm. And if this was a real interview and you didn't ask me about the private equity firm, I don't care how well you did on the rest of the case, you're not moving on, because it's a key element of this case. Who are they? What else do they own? And why do they want to buy this? So just keep that in mind. Whenever you get a merger and acquisition question, you always want to ask about the acquiring company. Who are they? Why did they want to buy this? And what do they own, or what other products do they have? All right, I want to take a second to talk about case notes. Case notes are important because most of the firms will collect your notes at the end of the interview. They scoop them up and put them in your file. It's one more data point that they look at. What did you write down? How did you write it? How well organized is it? How did you do your math? And can I read your handwriting? Okay, they take notes very seriously. They like it when you hold your notes landscape. And on the left-hand side is where you'd write down all the information that they gave you. And remember, it's coming at you like a fire hose, so some people use symbols, some people use shorthand. I don't care what you do, try to capture it as much as you can. And then when you summarize the case, fill in the blanks that you missed. Then you draw a line, and on the top of the right-hand side, I always put the objective across the top. I never want to lose sight of the objective. I'm going to go back and check on the objective from time to time. And then under that, I'm going to write the answers to the questions that I asked them, or I'm going to lay out my structure. Now, some other key things about notes. You can use either graph paper or you can use white paper. I like to use graph paper because graph paper reminds me to graph things if I can. They love it when you graph it. Even if your graph makes no sense at all, but you can still explain it, you get points for graphing. It also helps me line up my zeros. Again, the biggest math mistake I see are people are off by a zero and they don't realize it. So using the graph paper helps you line up your zeros. Only use one side of the page so you're not flipping back and forth. I like to lay my notes out in front of me so I can see the whole case at a glance. Some of these cases you may have 4 or 5 pages of notes. And I always keep that first page right by my side because it's chock full of information that the company gave me. And I want to check in on the objective from time to time, and I want to go back and I want to look at that information. Because remember, some of it was relevant right away, I jumped on it. Some of it I wasn't sure about, and if I go back in the middle of the case, you know what, I'm going to find that the information that they gave me that I thought wasn't particularly relevant is critical to the case. So you always want to go back and check that first page. You also want to get in a habit of drawing your notes. You want to do it for a couple reasons. One, if you ever sat down with a consultant or a senior manager, chances are they drew out their notes. It's how they think and it's how they want you to think. Also, when the recruiter's not looking you right in the eye, they're looking at what you're writing down because they know what you should be writing down, right? And they're trying to follow your thought process. So if you write in pencil and you write very small, it's going to be very frustrating to them because they're not going to be able to follow your thought process. So you may want to write a little bigger than you do. You may want to use an ink pen. But you also want to draw your notes. And by drawing your notes, I'm talking about decision trees, boxes, arrows, flowcharts, charts, that sort of thing. And one of the main reasons why you want to do it is so you can then take your page and flip it around. Turn it towards them. Because what happens is they're sitting back here feeling like an interviewer, throwing out information. Okay. If you turn your page towards them, they're now leaning over the paper with you, going through your thought process. And when they break that imaginary plane, They go from feeling like an interviewer to feeling like a client. And you want them feeling like a client as much as possible. Okay? It's a simple thing, huge impact. Okay? Turn your notes towards them, bring them in. And as we'll see shortly when we look at the evaluation form, one of the things you get evaluated on is teamwork. Teamwork, it's a one-on-one case interview. How are you evaluating me on teamwork? Well, did you bring me into the process? Did you make me feel like a client? Was I a stakeholder in this, or did I feel like an interviewer the whole time? You also want to star the most important points in your notes as you go through them. At the end of the case, they're going to ask you to summarize the notes, summarize the case. Now, a couple things about a summary. One, you don't get 10, 15, 20 seconds to collect your thoughts. You need to summarize it immediately. Okay? And if you had gone through and you starred or highlighted or circled the most important points of the case, they're going to jump off the page at you. I've seen people rifle through 4 or 5 pages of notes trying to remember what was important and where I wrote it down. And you know what? They don't look very professional doing it. So you want to star and highlight. The other thing about a summary is that it's short. Okay, 30 seconds to a minute, possibly a minute and a half at the most. Okay, it's not a rehash of every single thing we talked about. It's a little bit of the backstory and then 2 or 3 key things that you want them to remember. Okay. I've had people do great on cases and then they give me a 3-minute summary and they've just shot themselves in the foot. So keep it short, hit the main points. And then finally, I like to keep a separate sheet of paper for my math. It keeps my other notes clean and linear. I have all my math on one page. I label the calculations, and it looks good. I used to give this case on FedEx, and it was very numbers heavy, and the people who had sloppy notes, they did the same calculations 2 or 3 times, and that's not very impressive. So firms take your notes very seriously, and you need to start learning how to organize them. Now, here's a sample of a case interview evaluation form. Basically, it's broken down into analytics, communications, and personal. The first thing on there is your structure. Okay, structure is probably one of the 2 most important things on that list. Now, on this list, there's 12 things. You can either get a 0, a 1, or a 2, so you can get a total score of 24. So if you can get a 20 or above, you're in good shape. And even though you can only get a 2 on the structure colors everything else on that list. So I can't tell you how important developing a good structure is. Also, the quant, it's not only multiplying and dividing, but it's turning things into a percentage. Okay. And then a lot of these cases have charts. Okay. Sometimes they give you the chart right up front, but more than likely they're going to, in the middle of the case, they're going to say, oh, this important information just came in, and they're going to slide it over to you. And you have a very short period of time where you can look at this, analyze it, extract what's important, and then apply it to your answer. And these charts aren't well designed. They're designed to make you dig for answers. Communication, you got all the usual suspects there: eye contact, articulation, listening, asking probing questions, and note layout. Again, notes are important. And then under personal, enthusiasm, you know, that rip right through it, look in your eye that I talked about a little earlier, and self-confidence. Now, self-confidence is the second most important thing on there. If you took this whole process and boiled it down, the 2 most important things that they look for are structure and self-confidence. Because as a consultant, you're going to be sitting across from a client. You're going to be 1 year out of school, and you're going to be talking to me, and I've been in this business for 20 years, and you've been telling me I've been doing it wrong for 18 years? You think I'm going to sit here and take it? I'm going to be in your face and down your throat. And they want to make sure that your confidence doesn't waver, that you can defend your answer without getting defensive or without getting upset, and that you can make a persuasive argument. So that's why self-confidence is so important. And then also, case interviews allow you to showcase your creativity and your intellectual horsepower. And you should take advantage of that. And one of the things you get rated on is logic, original thought, intellectual curiosity. You also get rated on teamwork and engagement, and that's simply turning your page around, turning it into a conversation, making the interviewer feel like a client. Now, some of the things they do, okay. Sometimes you're in a case and they're going to force you to make a decision, strategy A or strategy B. And let's say you pick strategy A. Okay. They're going to look you right in the eye and say, let me tell you why you're wrong. If you had picked strategy B, they'd look you right in the eye and say, let me tell you why you're wrong. Doesn't matter which side you take, they're going to tell you why you're wrong. If they tell you why you're wrong and you're listening to their argument and you're not buying it, you can simply say, that's an interesting argument, however, I didn't find it compelling enough. I think A is the right answer, I'm sticking with A, and these are the reasons why. Okay. If they say, let me tell you why you're wrong, and they bring up something that you didn't think about, and now that you're thinking about it, you think, right? You know what? I'm wrong, he's right. There's no problem with admitting that you're wrong. Corporations hire consulting firms because they're objective. And if you are protecting an answer that you know is obviously wrong, you're not objective and you're not a consultant. Also, you may get a case that is, here's my problem, or here's an idea, give me a list of pros and cons. So with a list of pros and cons case, you draw a line down the middle of your page, write pros on one side, cons on the other, and then you say, I just want to take a minute and write down my thoughts, and write them down however they pop into your head. Okay, give me all the pros first, all the cons. If you do it off the top of your head, what happens is people will give me a pro, then they'll give me the con, and then they'll give me the con associated with the pro. And they ping pong back and forth, which is the worst thing you can do. What you want to do is you want to give me all the pros first and all the cons. And then finally on the math skills. Remember, you can't use a calculator. You're going to see things like percentages, break-evens, weighted averages, net present values, usually 2 years out at 5%. But the biggest problem I see is multiplication and division with lots and lots and lots of zeros. And I don't care if you were an applied math undergrad or a PhD in string theory, they all have problems with math. And then finally, some ways to prepare. Read case in point, make a case journal, do practice cases. One of the books that I like, the University of Michigan has a book that they put out that has lots of practice cases in it. There's things online that you can get, CQI, case chase clips. You can go to the McKinsey, BCG, Bain website and do cases there. But again, nothing beats live practice. So form groups, do cases with advisors, do cases with alumni, and there's a little company called evisors.com. They probably have 80 consultants, former and current consultants that would love to do cases with you. And it's a good way to get a feel for where you stand in the process. Because doing cases among yourselves will give you the basics, but you need to get one level higher, and evisors is a great place to find out where you stand. Well, the first part of the question, you're likely to get the same case whether you're an MBA or an undergrad, or even if you're a PhD or a JD. But their expectation of your answer is going to be very different. They don't expect an undergrad to answer it the same way that an MBA would. They don't expect a PhD to approach it the same way either. I mean, one of the reasons why they like people with various degrees is because you can only reach so deep in the MBA barrel. They want to take the top of the barrels of all these different kind of degrees. They're looking for smart people who have good communication skills and good quant skills, and maybe who think a little differently than other people. So the questions are going to be pretty much the same, but their expectation of your answers. Now some, the case, here's my problem, what do I do? Those are more Bain and BCG like. Here's my problem, I want you to figure out these 4 things. McKinsey is the one that uses those. But you could get either of those at any of the firms. I don't want to draw a broad brush and stereotype. But you should be prepared, no matter who you're interviewing with, to answer those types of questions. So what happens if you get stuck? Okay, that's an excellent question. There's a couple things you can do. First of all, the interviewer knows you're stuck. They know you're in trouble, and if they're nice, they're going to toss you a bone in the form of a question which will get you over the wall. If that doesn't happen, chances are you're stuck because you're mired in too much detail. So what I like to do is I like to recap. By recapping, it lifts me up out of the mud above the tree line, and as I recap, I can often see where I went off course. If that doesn't work, I go back to my first page of notes. Remember, it's chock full of good information that they gave me. Some of it was relevant, some of it I didn't think was relevant. When you go back and check on there, you're going to find that there's a lot of hints or even answers that they gave you right up front that you didn't realize. If that doesn't work, you can quietly go through the 5 C's. And the 5 C's are cost, competition, channels, company, and client. And the reason why I say quietly is because they view that as a cookie-cutter framework. And if they know that you're using the 5 C's, they're likely to take some points off. But it's a pretty broad spread, so you might realize, well, you know what, I haven't talked about distribution channels yet. I'll talk about distribution channels. Now, if that doesn't work, you can ask them for help. You might say something, I seem to be in a pinch and I need some guidance, or I've seen to hit a wall, can you give me some guidance? It's not the end of the world to ask for help. You can ask for help once and not really have to worry too much about it, but if you have to ask for help more than once, well, you're sailing in shallow waters. Well, some people would say all case questions are trick questions. But if you approach them in an analytical and logical way, then you can usually tackle them. Sometimes there is kind of a trick to them, that they're looking for you to come up with a certain answer. Now, most of these cases, I would say probably 90 to 95% of the cases, there is no one right answer. Okay, and 10% of the cases there might be one right answer, and a lot of times those tend to be the trick questions because they're looking for this one right answer. They actually want you to do well, but they're going to put you through a bunch of hoops. They're going to push your buttons. When they cut you off, when they say, "Let me tell you why you're wrong," don't take that personally. They're not only doing it to you, they're doing it to everybody they see today. So they just want to get a reaction out of you. They want to see how you're going to stand up when someone comes back in your face. So, yeah, they do stress interviews as well, where there might be 2 of them and 1 of you, and they're throwing questions at you left and right to see how you handle that. Sometimes they may look at each other and whisper, or they might say, if you fumbled a math problem, they may say, last night at dinner, I gave my daughter that same question, and she got it like this. And oh, by the way, she's in 8th grade. So they're going to throw things at you just to kind of see how you react. Any knowledge that you know about the industry is helpful. Any real numbers, like the number of Netflix accounts, will kind of get you in trouble. A lot of these cases are about everyday sorts of things. You know, shoes, airplanes, bottled water, you know, flip-flops, factories, that sort of thing. Things that you have a little bit of knowledge about so you understand the industry overall. I used to give a case about a chemical company, and as soon as I started, the students' faces just dropped. You could tell that, you know, they couldn't imagine a worse case than a case about a chemical company. But if they had really listened to my question, they realized that it wasn't about a chemical company, it was about entering a new market. I could have thrown anything in there, but I knew if I had mentioned a chemical company or an insurance company, their eyes would glaze over. So listen to the case very carefully, and you can figure out an answer. All right, well, there's two parts to that. Sometimes you listen to the case and you know what the answer is right off the bat, and you just want to blurt it out and say, you know, buy the competitor or whatever the answer is. But blurting is never good, okay? You need to kind of figure it out. So if you have an answer that you wanted to blurt, what I normally do is I write it in the right-hand corner of my page. And it's almost as good as blurting. At least I get it out and I know where it is and I can come back and check on it. But think of this as 8th grade math class where you had a test or you're working through a problem and you looked at the problem and you wrote down the answer 8. And the teacher comes by and she says, I don't care about the answer, show your work. This is the exact same thing. This is 8th grade math class all over again. They want to know how you think, what goes through your mind, how you solve the problem.